Hi, Sarah. This is Ira. I'm recording here my voice feedback on your statement of belief paper. And my aim in so doing is to help you move from this paper to the Defining Good Argument in Digital Context essay. So I really enjoyed reading this short piece, and I'm looking forward to working with you as you develop the longer, more fully systematized large-scale piece. This is a wonderful way of starting off. This idea that your thinking about thinking is where you really end up with an attunement to argument. I think that's a really, really nice, important insight. Is that, in some sense, an awareness of argument always, on some level, comes out of thinking about how one thinks, not just how one produces discourse, although the two are entwined, of course. And so when you say that the only way our various narratives are accepted is through good argumentation, I'm totally tracking you, and that we consciously and unconsciously participate in argument evaluation all the time. I certainly agree. That makes good sense to me. And accordingly, that different contexts have different local definitions of good argument. I think that's an important point. And it does a good job of explaining why your emphasis is here is to articulate three conditions almost for good argument. You say three main components. But they seem like, in a sense, there are three things that have to prevail if an argument is to be good. So perspective taking, audience consideration, and credible source use. And then you finally say there, without these components, I find arguments to be less credible and therefore less effective. So the thing I want to ask you about going forward is what argument is for across contexts in a way that would make these three components such important pieces. And it seems like here you're saying that good argument is effective. But I think not only effective, right? Or maybe only effective. Is there more to it than that or not? That's not clear to me from the way this is written. Which again is not a criticism of this, but rather something I'm interested to hear you say more about going forward. Is effectivity in argument enough? And on that level, what are arguments for? Why do we argue? In the next paper in particular, in digital contexts. And of course we argue for lots of different reasons. And yet, we do think of argument as one particular kind of thing. And so what are the basic aims of that kind of thing that these different components or conditions are related to? You offer some strong reasons for taking different perspectives into view, and in particular, suggest that on the one hand, that means that a person's open to hearing how the other side thinks. So for you, that increases their ethos, and on the other hand, makes it more possible for you to engage. And on the other hand, not doing that makes a person really have a perspective that seems unsolid because they haven't tested it against other opposing perspectives. I'm tracking you in all this, and one of the things I'm kind of curious about is when you're engaging with others in an open and constructive way about their viewpoints, and this kind of comes back to the previous question, what's the goal of that? What's the aim of that? What is the good in that activity that helps you think about globally what good argument is? What, I don't want to say telos, it's a little too strong. And I certainly don't want to say that that's universal. But for you, what is that? And what do you think it probably ought to be for other people? So in the Defining Good Argument in Digital Contexts essay, we're really moving into the domain of you making the case for a certain view of argument that you would hope other people would take on and engage. And so, what is the goal of argument that's motivating this? Also, this is very interpersonal and dialogic, and I'm wondering how you see that translating or not translating to mass-mediated or multilateral contexts. In other words, how well do these components do in helping us to account for good argument in like a presidential speech, or good argument in an advertisement, or bad argument in an advertisement, or good argument among multiple different people, where everyone is, by the very nature of the multilaterality, restricted in time and scope to how much they can say. So in other words, these are some of the things that I think will be helpful to think through as you're trying to locate your sense of good argument for digital contexts especially. Likewise, we often think about audience awareness. I mean, you've thought about it smartly here, but we often think about it as appealing to a specific audience. And certainly in most instances where we produce some marks, whether it's writing in a published way, or it's shouting in the public square, we have multiple audiences. It's rarely the case that we have just one audience, especially in digital contexts. So one of the things that I think is really interesting about the digital is the spreadability of digital content. Somebody produces something in one context, and they have one kind of collection of audiences in mind, or one specific audience in mind, and then that something that they produce travels, it spreads, it goes viral, and it suddenly has a bunch of other audiences. And so there's a sense in which it's useful to think about, to what extent do arguments in digital contexts have to account for that to be good? In other words, do good arguments in digital contexts, are they aware of multiple audiences, and how do they maintain that audience awareness? How does audience awareness happen, especially in contexts that are implicitly anonymous? Especially since your strongest statement about what a straightforward bad argument is, I mean, strongest in the sense of a simple declarative statement, it's the inability to analyze audience and to appeal to them in a way they can understand and be receptive to. I also hear, I'm curious about what Chaim Perlman and Lucy Obrecht-Sateka in The New Rhetoric describe in terms of bad audiences. When you have an audience that you can only appeal to in ways that are morally suspect to you personally, can your argument be good argument by analyzing them well and appealing to them effectively? Or is it then necessarily a bad argument for you? And that's a real question. I think it's not immediately obvious. It's a question one has to decide about for oneself. And when you talk about credible sources, I'd be interested to know more about what you see as making a source credible. In what does the credibility of a source consist? How are they identifiable? How do good arguments, especially short arguments, mark the credibility of their sourcedness if there's not space to actually be citing sources the way we do in a scholarly essay? So, for instance, I'm thinking of people arguing in the comment section online. And we could say there is no good argument in comment sections. And that's fine. If you want to say that, then that's a case you could make. But let's just imagine you want to make the case that good argument sometimes happens in comment sections. But comment sections are almost exclusively unsourced. It's rare, although not unheard of, for somebody to cite the sources of their view. And that's because the flow of information is from one short thing to the next, to the next, to the next. The flow of attention, not information. The flow of attention is from one short thing to the next. So audiences are much less likely to engage in a lot of digital contexts with longer, fuller, well-cited articulations. Some contexts they do, but a lot of digital contexts they don't. And so what does that mean for good argument? Does it mean it's not possible in those contexts, or does it mean your definition needs to shift to accommodate those contexts? Or does it mean that the citing of sources happens in certain implicit ways in those contexts, or something else entirely? So I think those are the kind of the kind of questions that I think will be useful as you move from this statement of belief to your larger theoretical essay. I look forward to talking with you about that when you're back in town, and I hope you have a great day and a great conference. Talk to you soon.